If you're looking for your purpose, it's going to be this golden thread that runs through everything. So look for the big problem that you're constantly trying to solve, and the chances are good you'll find that golden thread in there.
I often think about the problem as a box, and we need to open that box, and it's a possibility that we haven't unpacked yet, and there's good stuff in there. How do you define purpose?
For me, purpose is the thing that we are here for, right? It's the reason that we're here. Our assumption is that for it to be meaningful, it's got to be big. And that's not the case at all.
Welcome to Mindset, Mood and Movement, a systemic approach to human behavior, performance and well-being.
How to think your way to purpose. It's a really intriguing line, isn't it? So we are going to be covering that today, and I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, Brad Bucceri. He's a specialist in helping people with messaging around purpose. Now, Brad and I have spoken, and he's got some great models and thinking processes, which I'm really excited to tuck into, and I trust you are too. Because when we're clear on our message, when we're clear on our purpose, and we're able to articulate that, certainly as a founder or as a business owner, it is so much more powerful. It cuts the signal from the noise. So we're going to get into that today. So Brad, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you on, mate.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited to be with you today.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm curious. So I always kind of want to jump straight in. Like,
Sure.
How did you get here? How did you get to spending your time and your wonderful skill set around helping people around purpose and their message?
It's a good question. And for me, it was a massive journey, and one that I didn't realize I was taking until I looked back retrospectively, right? And so for me, it was a case of I never really felt like I knew what my purpose was. I knew when I wasn't doing it, but I didn't know how to pinpoint it. And I looked at books like Start With Why, Simon Sinek, all of that sort of stuff, and I never really kind of got to grips with it. And always felt very average at a number of different things and not good at one thing. And I would see people around me who were very good at one thing, and I would wonder how they got there. And long story short, as time progressed, it's kind of unfolded to the point where I've had this light bulb moment, as I would say, and now I help other people understand how to connect to their purpose.
Beautiful. It's funny, isn't it? The thing that we're grappling with, that kind of life lesson, you're like, actually, there's something in this. It's wonderful. I've been through huge amounts of personal growth and professional growth over the last probably 15 years now. I've really gone into just constantly year in, year out. And of course, at the beginning, I was seeking that stuff, and then I was very good at delivering that. But what I found is it's a symbiosis that certainly as a coach, and I kind of step into the role of mentor consultant sometimes, but mostly coach, that we need to be going through the process ourselves and help others. So it's refining. It's apply to self and apply to others, isn't it?
100%. And what I often say to people is, if you're looking for your purpose and you're trying to find it, it's going to be this golden thread that runs through everything. And there's going to be one problem or a type of problem that kind of has the same flavors throughout your journey that you're going to be solving. And so I like to say, people, as a place to start, your problem is hidden, or your purpose is hidden in your problem. So look for the big problem that you're constantly trying to solve, and the chances are good you'll find that golden thread in there.
Yeah, that's such a powerful point. Look for the problem. Yeah, look in that problem you're trying to solve. It's in there. That's such a great thing, because we have, a bias towards trying to get rid of problems, don't we? It's very much a mindset view, certainly in the West. So you have a problem, we want to get rid of the problem. But actually, I often think about the problem as a box, and we need to open that box, and it's a possibility that we haven't unpacked yet, and there's good stuff in there. Now, purpose, it's a word that's used a lot in professional domain and personal, development. Purpose can be a misleading word. So I'm really keen on getting sharp on language, what we mean by that. And purpose can mean different things to different people. So can you elaborate? Or how do you define purpose?
So for me, purpose, I think, is the thing that we are here for, right? It's the reason that we're here. Excuse me. I think a lot of the time, and this might seem a bit of a tangent, but it's connected. We have all this technology to make our lives better and to make things simpler. And their strapline often is to make everybody more connected, but it has the opposite effect, actually. And so it kind of skews our perspective as to what purpose is. And people want to make an impact. And I think that contributes a lot to depression and feelings of worthlessness when we feel like we're not making an impact. And we've lost sight of the fact that impact is made, or our sense or our perception of impact being made happens when we're helping other people. And so I believe that if we connect and help each other more, we will, by and large, find what our purpose is and connect with that.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. Thank you. And it's so powerful, isn't it? I look at a lot of things from psychology and philosophy, both in East and West, from contemporary to ancient. And if we take a Western worldview, a generalized one here, but we generally are individualists. We think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and any business owner knows this, the whole self-actualization process. And that's both true and not true. So if we sort of cycle from the Eastern view, which is collective, they look at, a collective pattern. It could be the group of people, your family, your friends, and community. But if we bring them together, it's actually both. There is an individual quality to our seeking and expressing of purpose. And yet it is only really going to happen with depth through connection with others, whether you make an impact in your business or you bring something to your community, which makes a shift to others. And there's something incredibly gratifying, isn't it, about when you do work that shifts and helps another, that you cannot not get the great feeling from that, even though it's about the other person. So by default, we get the good stuff anyway.
100%. And I think we've lost sight of this idea because of the culture that we live in. We are led to believe that our purpose has to be something huge, right? And we have to influence millions of people because of the scale of the way social media has enabled interaction between people. Our assumption is that for it to be meaningful, it's got to be big. And that's not the case at all. I think when we help a single person in the small way that we can, we don't realize, but we're contributing to this symphony of human interaction and on a much bigger picture, this kind of orchestra that's being played. And on your own, it doesn't sound or look like much, but when it's put together with everything else, even if you can't hear or see that bigger picture, it's happening. And that's where the impact happens.
Yeah, that's really nice. And it's such an important point to call that there are, we're exposed to the world now with social. We're exposed to, an entrepreneur in the States, an adventure in, Thailand. We can see and be inspired and look at other people. And there is a sense, isn't there, that, one should make a big difference in the world. But I think making a real difference is actually probably more impactful. So what's the real difference you might make with your family? Like starting your ecosystem of the family or in your business. What difference can you make in your business? Because then it becomes tangible and workable. And I know one of my challenges of my mind in the past, it used to be anchored on the big stuff. And what it was, and I had a great coach who called it out for me. He's like, so you're focusing on these great big goals because you're actually avoiding doing the small steps. So you just have an idea on the fantasy rather than the grit of like, well, what's going to happen? And as soon as I changed that for not a lesser goal, but a more workable goal in the moment that had tangible effects, suddenly it's like, oh, this is, pull sleeves up, hands in the mud kind of situation. This is really happening. And yet it has absolute feeling. So such a good point. So when you're taking people through, let's say you're taking me through, it's like, hey, Brad, well, how do I explain what I do? Where do we go with this? Take us into the mind of Brad. So if someone's sitting here scratching their head going, yeah, kind of get the vibe. I need to be clear on my purpose and kind of work out with it. How do you take an individual or an organization into the first steps of finding out what that is?
Sure. So for the most part, I like to work with people who have a desire to help other people, right? For me, that's the foundational point, because I think if we're not there in our thinking, we're not going to be very teachable to this idea and the way that integrates with other people. And so what I like to do is I like to say, okay, your purpose is in your problem. What is that problem that you've solved for yourself? And how did that transformation as a result of that problem impact you? So let's go back on your journey and unpack your journey, unpack those moments where you had a realization, where you saw a situation for what it was and no longer for what it was perceived to be. So in other words, your perception shifted and became perspective. So you had a bird's eye view on a situation. And how can we help other people who are stuck where you were to have those same light bulb moments, if you like, so that they can get to that point of transformation themselves.
Yeah, really interesting. Now, I want to just zoom in on what you said there. You said about perception shifting to perspective. Is that right?
100%. Yeah.
So perception, just to kind of elaborate on that, in my interpretation, perception is the interpretation that each of us individual human beings have on what the world is and what's going on. And that's built on all our backstory, all our neurological processes, our family, our influences. It sounds simple, but it's a very complex weave of the human inner system. And perception isn't factually real. If you look at systems theory, which is one of my great areas I love to look at with the work I do, is that perception is this filter. And as an analogy or a metaphor, I often think of it like putting on some nice eyewear. So you got some glasses, you might have, say, yellow lenses, you might have red lenses or blue. And which ones you put on change your view of the world, whether it's a cool day or a warm day. At a very simplistic analogy, but that's a little like the mind, and its perception is a bit like that, quantified like that. So it filters through, and that's your beliefs, your values, your upbringing. So when we shift that to perspective, what do you mean by perspective?
So I think that's a brilliant example, and it's far better than I could have put it. But the idea of living in a perceptive state where we are constantly bombarded with information, and we assume that that information is always correct, and we base our emotional state and our outlook on the world on that information that we're getting. And so we make decisions on that information when it may not be factual, and how we feel about that information. And most of the world, and all of us at some point, still do act from that place of perception. And for me, this is about saying, hold on a minute. I understand that's not always the case. What am I not considering in this situation? These are what I perceive to be the facts, but what am I not considering? And then explore those avenues. And as a result of exploring those avenues, if you do it enough and you do it often enough, you get really good at it. You get really good at learning to ask better questions. And when we ask better questions, we're going to get better answers, right? And it's going to help us to think differently. And when we do that, we elevate our thinking. And so when we elevate our thinking, we can then look back at the situation that we were on from a place of perspective, because we're now looking down on that previous thought or understanding or belief from a place of perspective. And so that's kind of my explanation of perception to perspective, etc.
Yeah, really nice. And it's such a powerful metaphor and a kind of working model. It seems so simple, right? One shift from one thing to another. But as we know with the mind, in the work I do with psychology, a distinction in the mind can be the change between a person becoming a success or a stressed out, burnt out business owner, and you're like, whoa. And it can be as subtle as one distinction. Sometimes it's multiple, but one distinction can change everything. So we need to be very mindful of the power of our filtering mind and what it's imbued with. And then also realize that we are adaptive systems. Our brain, our body, everything can adapt and learn at any point. And that's, I think, the gift of being a human being, right? We can continuously evolve. I had a guest on the pod recently, and she was a scientist in anthropology, and they did this great book called On the Origin of Being, which I can link in the show notes. And they were talking about how our DNA hasn't changed in like 100,000 years, as we basically haven't changed. But what humans are very good at is changing the environment. So whilst we can't fly, like a bird, or we can get an aircraft, we can build an aircraft because we have vision, we have technical skills and creativity. So what's natural to humans is being able to shape the environment. Now, of course, in some ways that hasn't worked so well because of the ecological crisis we're living through. And yet at the same time, it's also a possibility and power, isn't it? So when we cycle that back to the process of purpose, if we have an ability to change our environment and it's purpose-led, then that sounds a really powerful way to work.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes back to something you said a little bit earlier, in the sense that we can tend to feel burnt out, but also we can struggle sometimes when we feel like it gets, we have to take our mind off of that big picture thinking for a moment and focus on the actual nitty-gritty tasks of doing. And for me, I think it all kind of lines up with this idea of purpose. I often say to people that your purpose is the propellant, right? It's the fuel that you need to be able to do the things that you don't want to do. And in doing those things, in taking steps forward, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn things, but things are also going to go right. And you're going to discover new things about yourself, about your environment. And that's going to help you to shape that environment. One, because in a literal and metaphorical sense, you're moving forward. You're moving forward. But also, because you're moving forward and because you're learning, you're being equipped with new things to physically change your environment. And so for me, again, and I harp on about it, it's the drum I beat. It comes back to this idea of the golden thread and the purpose, to using that to push yourself forward on the days when you don't want to.
Yeah, really, really nice. I just want to make a point here. I was coaching someone recently, and we were talking about motivation, and they had quite a strong understanding of motivation. And I was coaching them through growth in their business, and I wanted to expand for them. I'm like, motivation. There is motivation in life, like things that motivate you. But in my experience, my definition, motivation is a bit like, say, coffee. You're a little snoozy. You have an espresso, you're like, whoa, feeling sharp. But that is going to tail off because the caffeine lifts you up a bit and it's going to drop. Much different to having, say, a 20-minute nap. Let's say you had a disrupted sleep and you're like, I need to work for the rest of the day. A 20-minute nap after lunch. That will power you way further and way deeper on than a cup of coffee, for example. So neither is right nor wrong, but understanding the nuances between motivation and purpose. I think this is where there's a gravity and a depth to this purpose work that you're doing, and it aligns with my work in the coaching. That when we tune into that stuff, it doesn't come and go. It's less volatile than motivation and likes. It's more deeply felt. I feel it in my body. When I do the work I do, which is to coach people who make a difference in the world, it's an embodied experience. I don't have to think. I can feel it. So that's one thing I find. Now, I want to ask you about golden thread. It's a beautiful analogy. Say more about how you build a golden thread, because it's really intriguing.
Sure. So I think for me, it's less about building the golden thread and more about blowing the dust off of the top of it, right? The stuff that's covering it up, because it's there from day one. And so it's more about uncovering that. And I'll give you an example of it. So somebody that I was working with creates a tool that helps people get from a place of struggling where they're kind of trapped in a grief place to a place where they're able to move forward with their life after that grief without feeling guilty. And so this golden thread there is this person's ability to help those people in that specific way. But it's not limited to this one specific tool, right? So this client of mine can do workshops that have the same golden thread and have the same positive outcome, but it's a different tool. And so it's more about saying, okay, this is that core piece that runs through everything. And then how can we then apply that to help people in a way that reaches the most people?
Really nice. Thank you. I'm going to share an example which is personal to me, it feels like that, and see if I'm on point here. So for my regular listeners, you may know, but newer guests, I've done many things over the years, Brad. I've been many identities, and I've had the pleasure of experiencing many versions of professional self. For some time in my life, I was a yoga teacher through my 40s. And yes, we often think about yoga as the posture work and the movement. And that's true, but that's not the totality of yoga. I'd happened to have been studying philosophy from Advaita Vedanta, which is ancient Vedic philosophy, for many years before that, which means non-duality. And what I came to understand is that I have this real love, and perhaps we call it purpose, about helping people wake up, helping people become more conscious. And I remember the great living guru called Sadhguru, who's such a cool guy. He's said in his wonderfully playful way, a yoga teacher's job is to wake people up. It's up to them what they do with it, which I love. But when I think about that, okay, if that's the thread, whether I did that through yoga, whether I do that through coaching, which I do, that's the thread. So it doesn't matter so much whether you're in, say, a yoga environment or I'm in a professional founder coaching environment, which is where my business is now. The core is the same, right? That thread is the same. Would that be what you're talking about here, about the golden thread?
100%. So the perfect example, and to sort of reiterate that and maybe take it a bit further, I was speaking to somebody close to myself the last couple of weeks who's really struggling from a a feeling of worth point of view, right? Which leads to a depressive state and all kinds of things. And so I was saying to this person, look, I can see my own journey in you. And I feel as though it's perhaps to do with the fact that you feel like you're not making an impact. And it was like the lights came on, and this person was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I think it is. And I was talking to them about uncovering this golden thread and finding his purpose, because the cool part is, right, it helps as a fuel if you're an entrepreneur building a business. But at the same time, you can be employed somewhere. And if you know what your purpose is, you can still act that purpose out in your place of employment. And, some people would love to be an entrepreneur, but when they tried, they're just not cut out for it. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean they're a bad person, but they equally struggle to be employed. And so you kind of get this dislodged feeling where you don't fit anywhere. But if you know what your purpose is, like you were just saying there, you can act that out in any environment you're in, getting that sense of fulfillment from making an impact in other people's lives.
Yeah, really, really nice. And it's true, isn't it? So most of my work is around coaching founders and business owners, but I recognize that maybe some of our listeners also might be employed or in a certain different level. And I do, it's good to nod to that actually autonomy is available anywhere, because autonomy comes from the self, our self-power, our self-choice. And that can come whether you're running a business, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're employed, perhaps whether you're a stay-at-home parent, something like that. But having your own choices, and as you've beautifully alluded to, tapping into that purpose can give a greater sense of fulfillment. It's curious. So I coach a lot of founders who are often on the second mountain. Now, I don't know if you've heard this phrase. So the first mountain is pretty much, say, your career or business building and money and buying some houses and regular Western stuff, maybe building a family. And you get to the point, often around 40, and most of the people I coach are around about 40, and they go, this isn't quite working how I want to, or I want to shift something. And whether that's the business evolves, whether it grows, whether there's a deeper sense. But almost the common thread that I see is there's a quest for something deeper, more human, more fulfillment based, more impactful. And we all need to make money because that's part of how we fund our lives. But if that is a standalone, it doesn't have depth to it. It sort of doesn't have enough fulfillment quality that drives these individuals. So fulfillment and purpose seems to be coming up in like it has to come into my life now. And it's a curious thing that I don't know why after 40 we seem to evolve into this state. Is there something you've seen in a profile of clients you work with that are showing up these patterns?
I don't know if I've seen it necessarily, but I know of its existence. And so that's why I'm smiling when you say that, because it really resonates with me. I mean, I'm nearly 40 myself. And I think, you get to this point where you realize that all the stuff that we were taught was right to chase, you realize that it's actually meaningless. It's nice to have for a bit, but if it doesn't matter if I've got a Vauxhall Insignia estate outside, or if I've got a Bugatti, both of them can get dented, both of them can get scratched, and both can get crashed, right? So at the end of the day, these things don't actually matter. And I think what you're speaking about, if I'm understanding what you're saying, is that we have to find, and we get to this point in our lives where we realize we have to find something that's more impactful and has a deeper meaning. That's my thoughts on that bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like it. I know a fellow, I think it was a coach, he was sharing something really interesting, which is like that the need for coaching is getting more and more. And he made his argument around a couple of things that are largely our culture's more secular now than it ever has been. And the sort of leadership qualities that we used to have are sort of falling away. So people are kind of like, we kind of need somebody to guide us. Now, that's not to walk around with a guru flag and say, follow me, because, that's not how this works. But there is a place for, perhaps if you've been informed and you've done the self-work and you've done the professional work, to be able to share stuff that is good in the world and lead in the right way. And one of the biggest things is fulfillment, because like you're saying, you could be sitting in your Bugatti Veyron and going, I could do with the other one in silver. Because if you have a not enough mindset, then that's your human quality. It's got nothing to do with the Bugatti or, whatever material item it is. It's to do with your mind. And that's to do with your story. And I think if we can tap into the filling the inside as well as filling the outside, then we get this beautiful, how do I function well in the world, make an impact and make the right amount of money I need? How do I make enough fulfillment in my soul, in my being, that when I show up and do things, it's all good. And I think this is what I really enjoy coaching, is this sort of double-tiered second mountain. Like, yeah, let's make some more money or make more impact, but with purpose, with fulfillment. It's because otherwise, what's the point? What I think.
100%. And something that I always say to people is, you know, you can't be unbalanced in this way, especially as entrepreneurs. We can't be unbalanced because it comes down to, and I think we were talking about this a little bit before the show, and it comes down to this idea of movers and takers, right? And that's what I call them in my world. And a taker is somebody who sets something up or creates something for what they can get out of it. Quite a selfish thing. And, you know, we've all been there, and the balance is all wrong. So to us, profit is more important than purpose and impact in that state. And what we want to do is shift our mindset. And this is what you help people do, from what I understand. You want to shift our mindset from a taker mindset to a mover's mindset, where we say, look, there's a better way of doing something. Let me help you on this journey. Let me show you how to ask better questions. Let's get to a place where purpose is equal with profit. And so there's this more balanced impact that we're making. It's no good the other side of the pendulum either, where purpose is more important than profit, because we need, like you say, everybody needs money to survive. And so we got to get this balance just right. And it's about how we get to that point.
Yeah, really nice. Again, I had a lovely guest called Gavin Willis on my show recently. I'll put, again, link to this in the show notes. And Gav his Search 7 is his company. They're in the SEO business, and they put 7% of their profits into charitable work. And he's an outstanding guy. He's just such a lovely guy. And he's just got this clear vision, this clear purpose. And he has the triple bottom line, which I believe is people, purpose, and profit. And he looks at them together, and it's a really strong model. And I've known Gav for a while and had him on the show recently. So listen to that one too, about some depth. So let's talk into what you said there about, okay, so we're holding this vision. We're entrepreneurs, business owners. We want more purpose, want to find that or establish that or clear that up. You said how. Now, how is a powerful word because it's a process word. How do you do it? Yeah. So have you got perhaps a story you want to share about maybe the how process?
Sure. Yeah. So I think for me, I think, I don't know if you've heard this, but it's something I would hear a lot out and about in the world is people giving their advice, saying to others, you know, don't sell the product, sell transformation, right? And that sounds great, but what does that really mean? And the idea for me of selling the transformation is getting into detail on the how, right? People want to know how you're going to get them there, how you're going to bridge this gap between where they are and where they want to be. And so as an example of that, going back to this person that helps others to create space in this grief, you know, I think it comes down to saying, revisit that journey that we've been on ourselves. So I helped her to think through this process of her own journey, her own life, her own situations. And it kind of emerged that there was these 4 or 5 things that she did to get herself from where she was to where she was now in a much better place. And so it's become less about this person selling jewelry, which is what she started out creating and selling, and more about this person saying, I make these things that I call memory catching devices or memory catching objects that help me to capture memories of people that you've loved or lost. And I've got these 4 or 5 steps of how I got from where I was to where I am. And so it takes her from selling products to her selling a solution where the product becomes a tool. And it's so much more powerful when we show people how we bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Whenever we're buying something, whether it's a trivial purchase or a big expensive purchase, we're buying stuff because we have an idea in our minds of who we want to become. And we believe that it's getting us closer closer or all the way to that thing. We never buy something thinking, oh, this is going to move me further away from who I want to be. And so if we can show people how we bridge that gap and how we get them closer or all the way to where they want to be, it's going to be infinitely easier to get them to invest in what we're selling, but also it's not going to feel like a sale.
Well, the coaching world is an interesting one. So we sell experience we don't sell anything. Actually, like we create space and add things to help a person change. There's an implicit view in my world, which is everyone has everything within them but you got the ingredients, you maybe don't have the right recipe. Or you got the right recipe, but you don't have the right tools. If we use a cooking metaphor, I got all the ingredients in the cupboard, but the cooker's not hooked up. Well, you don't know how to use it. Or perhaps you got the cooker, you got all the tools, but you simply don't have the recipe. So there's something missing in the current state where you are and the desired or the future. Like, I'd like to do this or I'd like to be that. And there's a bridge in between, as you elegantly said, and we need to create that bridge. In the coaching space, for me, I invite people to have a conversation because I can tell people about psychology and, how the brain works and neurology and nervous system responses. It doesn't mean anything. It does mean something, but in terms of like someone says, okay, why should I work with you? And let's spend some time together. Let's have an experience, because an embodied experience where you have in the flesh, like, oh, I understand, or I get these insights. There's a self-ownership around that. And that really shifts people. Now, of course, the coaching domain is talking of the inner world, changing the outer world. And it's, in some ways, it's a bit abstract. Perhaps if you're selling jewelry or products or maybe services, I don't know, telecom services, they're slightly different in the B2B domain, but there's still a similar quality, isn't there? There's still that journeying of explaining and showing someone, how do we get from here to there? So perhaps we can go into that a little bit more, because I'm really intrigued in process. I love process because it speaks to my systems thinking approach. Look at processes and relationships. They tell us a lot about stuff. Can you say a bit more about how you might treat one of those processes? Either use an example or give us some understanding, because I think this is where my intrigue in my like, yeah, Brad, I love this, but how do you do it? How do you do it? I want to know. Can you share a little more around the how process?
Yeah. So from my perspective on how I get people through that, it comes down to 6 areas that I've highlighted. And the first one of those is what I call the past. So I look at somebody's past, like I've said earlier in this conversation, and I look at their past. I look at the area that they're in. If this is in relation to somebody creating a product or service that they want to be seen as different to everybody else, we'll go through, what does the existing industry get wrong? How does all of that look? How does it come together with your story? Then I take them through who they're serving, right? And this I get super passionate about this bit, because everybody in marketing talks about customer avatar. And this is on a much more emotional level. And so what you were saying there really spoke to me, because there's this idea of getting somebody to invest from an emotional perspective versus trying to convince someone by talking at them with logic. And the two are never going to meet, right? And so if you could have the best logic in the world, but if someone isn't receiving that in the right way, you're going to get more resistance. And so who are we serving on a much deeper level? What are their false beliefs around what we're trying to talk to them about? How can we start to break down those false beliefs? Where are they consuming content so that we can start to influence them in a positive way with content that's more constructive, more uplifting, that's going to build them up? Then the third area that I look at with people is the future. What does that look like with the introduction of your new, better way of doing something, whether it's a product or a service? What do you call that? Ultimately, this is a vehicle. Your business is a vehicle that's getting somebody from A to B. What do we call that? What is it instead of? What is it better than? And then I get into the how of how they actually help people have the transformation. So this, at a bigger picture, is my how, but then we break down their how. So where are people starting? What was the place that you started in? What was the place that you're in now? And how are you going to help them get there? And we kind of break down the key stepping stones between those 2 points. So we can say, okay, now we've got a land bridge, but then what are all of those, the smaller things that have to happen underneath each of those stepping stones for us to accomplish those bigger stepping stones? And in doing that, we kind of outline this whole plan of how people can actually achieve a transformation. And then the 5th thing is looking at the questions that people are asking before they actually start taking action towards the goal you want them to act towards. And getting clear on the fact that nobody's starting from the same place, but people generally start from similar areas. So there's going to be like 6 or 9 areas that people are starting from. And then the very last part of that is summarizing all of this. What's the one thing I want people to believe after having an interaction with me? And then understanding that everything we do in our life and in our business is about finding a way to knock that idea over in somebody's mind. And so we approach it from as many different ways as we can, always with the focus of making this one point.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I love it. That's a really nice roadmap, beautiful description of how that works. I really could catch that. So of course, we'll map this out for for show notes. So if you're listening, maybe just replay that point. Because there was the steps. Now, of course, you may need Brad to help you on that, but really, really important point. And what I hear there is this real ability to expand your perspective, as you were saying earlier, because if your perspective expands, like, well, what's the customer experience? What are their blocks? What are the truths? What are the lies they tell them? So what are all these pieces? Because often we come from self, it's natural. We are an individual creature and we go, oh, sell my stuff. Hey, do you want my stuff? But actually we need to step into the mind of the other. And you very elegantly explain how that can happen, because we don't buy us and we don't experience us. We experience the other, or we might try, do trade with another person or business. So actually being in psychology, it's called second positioning. So going into stepping into their shoes is so vital, because it gives us a perspective that we don't have if we stay in position one, just the self. So that's really, really nice. And I love what you said there, because it lines to the value of making an impact by working with others. Because what you're talking about there is the consideration of others in a very healthy way and connecting with others. So actually it's enacting that value-led approach of, purpose comes from helping others. So it's actually imbued in your process, which I suspect you knew, but I'm just calling it out.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's what makes this so powerful, because you could have theoretically hundreds of competitors, but if you approach it from the idea of, I'm unique, no one thinks exactly like me, no one's had the exact same journey as me. And so if I can infuse all of that into this business of mine, which in and of itself is a container that's worthless, without us as the entrepreneurs, it's worthless. And so if I can infuse all of that uniqueness into this vehicle, then I could be surrounded by a bunch of competitors. But because I'm putting my unique essence through it, all of them are going to disappear, because I'm going to immediately resonate with people who kind of get where I'm coming from. And so when we go through a process like this and we act on our purpose and we broadcast that message to the world, you're going to get people who resonate with it, and they're going to flock to you. Whether somebody else can solve that problem or not, you're going to find your people. And so in doing this, you can get your business to a point where the competition disappears and you become the only logical choice.
Really nice. Yeah. It sort of speaks to sympathetic resonance, which is the principle that things resonate in systems. So if you have a tuning fork and it's got a certain frequency and you hit it, so will the guitar string or whatever's nearby. There's the great, I can't remember his name, I think it's a Danish clockmaker. Anyway, he was in bed. This is going back a couple hundred years. He was in bed. He wasn't well. And he said his clocks going. They were the, what's called the swinging clocks, pendulum clocks. And he set them, they were going different. And what he noticed after time, they went into synchronicity. So there is this thing it's probably physics, this space, if we want to give it a term, where we have a synchronization with others. In humans, we know it because we call it rapport. We get on with others, we vibe with another person. We use the word vibe, like colloquially, but vibration, right? A vibratory quality, which if we were to use brain science is probably a brainwave mapping. And we now know that our limbic brains resonate with other people we're really in connection with. So this is a beautiful way of, once again, talking about connection with other, serving the other, respecting the other, but understanding the technical stuff, which we know from neuroscience and physics and that, which say this is actually what happens. So that's really powerful. Now, a bit of me likes looking at jeopardy in life, because, if we're all happy and looking at the positives, it's like, well, let's look at the shadow. What might not work? So let's just name, if we're okay to, when you're not working in this aligned, purposeful way, what's at stake? What might happen? What have you seen problem wise where you've had to clean up for other people?
Yeah, I think even just starting with myself in that scenario, I think I was employed for a number of years in different roles, and I was doing the job that I thought I wanted to do. And I got to this point every time where I never clinically diagnosed with depression, but I would say that at one stage I was definitely very depressed about where I was at. And I think that's because I wasn't fulfilling my purpose. I became aware of the fact that it wasn't the places I was working in. I realized I had enough sort of perspective at that point, not enough to deal with it, but enough to realize that this was an issue with myself. And it wasn't about the places I was working in. I could go and get a different job somewhere else, but I was going to end up in the same place. And this was because I wasn't fulfilling a purpose. I wasn't having impact. And so I think just from my own experience, that's kind of the dark side of things. You can get down this very dark hole, and it can feel like there's no hope. It can feel like you're worthless. It can feel like you're useless, when in fact, that's a complete lie. And the opposite is true. You've got a very unique something to add to the people of this world. And you have to do everything you can to find out what that is and get that out there.
Yeah, thank you. It's really nice. And it sort of makes me think of one of the concepts I hold, which is where are we coming from? Because of course, certainly in coaching, it's often about change and growth and evolution. I think evolution is a really accurate word. But if we're coming from a certain place, and that place is lack, like I'm not enough. If I just make £1 million, £1 million, $1 million, then I'll be enough. Like it still won't work, because where you're coming from is a lack. Your mindset's predicated on lack, and your the parts of your brain, the reticular activating system will focus on lack, and it will give evidence, and we'll end up still lacking at a higher level. You'll be a lacking millionaire. And I was in conversation with a business colleague recently, and they shared that this individual sold their business and multiple millions of pounds they'd sold, and they were asking for free stuff, like, some free advice and free this. And my colleague was like, wow, really? Didn't you just make a lot of money? And we were talking about, isn't it interesting? So even though the bank balance might have said you're doing well, if we're going to give it an objective measure, their mindset said you're still very poor. And I think really getting like where are we coming from sorted and aligned to where we're going to, that's that powerful gravitational resonance we're speaking about. So it's really, really powerful. Thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And also you mentioned there about the quality of your state of mind, like going into a depressed quality, was probably the tell, right? The tell of like the things aren't really working as you perhaps need to work for you.
Yeah. And I think coming back to your example there of the millionaire bank account and my example as well, I think it's so ingrained in us to assess what's happening by what we think is a result, right? And so it comes back to this idea of logic and emotion. And so we're so used to using logical factors and landmarks to try and find our position and justify our position that we kind of lose our way. And no one really ever teaches us to ask better questions or to ask deeper questions that are going to get us to that point where we're able to say, okay, this isn't a place of employment problem. This is a deeper emotional level problem. Because that's kind of now how I spot those things, right? Is I say, this feels irrational, or that coming from that person is irrational. There's something deeper here, right? The answer they're giving me is not the real answer. The answer I'm giving myself is not the real answer. Let me ask questions that are going to get me deeper down to understand the emotional core of whatever it is that's coming out, or the behavior that's being exhibited.
Yeah, really, really nice. And it's worth naming that, we make meaning out of everything. The way we pattern meaning into the world. So there's a great writer called Jeremy Lent. He's written 2 books, big fan of him, Patterning Instinct and The Web of Meaning. And he's basically looked at loads of like how we make meaning from way, way back in ancestry. And we ascribe meaning to everything. And I've also studied in existentialism, and the existential frame would say, well, there's no meaning inherent in anything. Like, we say, oh, it's a lovely day. It's like, it's not, it's just a day with the sunshine or rain, but we make a meaning like it's a good day, bad day. And so humans make meaning wherever we go, whether we like it or not, we make a meaning. So we want to be very careful, like who's choosing the meaning? Like, did I choose the meaning? Is it come from culture? Does it come from my backstory and my parents? Who's choosing this meaning? How am I ascribing meaning? But the interesting point around meaning, it's never not connected to an emotional charge. So, if we think about, I'm looking out the window, it's quite a nice day. I might say, it's a lovely day. And I sort of smiled as I said it. I had an uplift in emotion. Now, if it's dark and miserable, chucking down with rain, I might say, oh, it's an awful day. I'm like, oh, a bit flat. So the meaning and the emotion are always, yes, they're separate, but they come together in this construct. So as you're saying there, when you just work on the logic level and you give yourself a logical goal, such as when my business 10X is, then it's all going to be great. It's like, well, logically, yes. But if you can't feel into that and embody into that 10X growth and what that might ask of you, then it's arbitrary. And secondly, it might be absolutely the worst goal in the world to go for. So where you're, as a saying in our world of the coaching world, was doing from being, like, how are you being, and do from there. So if you're being connected, if you're being insightful, purposeful, kind, impactful, you cannot not do good work from there. But if you're only doing, such as, 70-hour weeks, trying to make more money, trying to get to a certain point, what's your being? Now, this is speaking to the dichotomy between the logical and the emotional. And here's the thing, they aren't separate. They're separate expressions of the same thing. You, me, us human beings. So when we understand that and realize that they're not separate phenomena, they're separate expressions, but of the same self, if you will, then we start to get, I think, that inner being more grounded. And then we can look at the purposeful acts.
Yeah. And I think, the example that I would kind of put to that to see if I understand where you're coming from is to say, I would dig deeper, find questions to dig deeper in myself as to what's actually happening here on an emotional level. And then say, okay, now that I understand that and where that's coming from, on a logical level, how do those logic points look? How does that support what I'm doing here, what I'm feeling here? And the way that I talk about this with the people that I work with is from that idea of helping others to want what they need, right? So if I've created a product and a service and I'm then taking that out to the world for them to purchase, the example that I use is my wife and I can have an argument and I can stay grumpy for a day. This is based on actual facts, right? So I can stay grumpy for a day and she won't have thought too much of it. And she'll come up to me and say something like, oh, don't let that ruin your whole day. Just move on. And it's logically sound, but I'm coming from a place where I'm in balance from that emotional drive perspective in that scenario. And so it's never going to connect with me. And so if we can learn to get around that, when somebody is in balance, like you say, it's part of the same thing, but when one or the other side is out of balance, we need to know how to question in such a way that we can bypass that system and speak to that person in a way that's going to be meaningful to them.
Yeah, very, very nice. I was on a group call only yesterday, and we were talking about the theme of enough-ness, and it could be around enough money, enough success, enough connection. It doesn't matter. It was a sentence that always ended with not enough. Yeah, whether that's sales, whether that's market share, whether that's team members, but anywhere where the sentence had the direction and feel of not enough has if we call it a meta quality, like the overarching theme, there's not enough, there's a hole. And one thing that came from the group, but actually came from my subconscious. So I'm not going to, it just sort of came up from our group work. So I didn't own it. It came up from a group mind, but the insight was seek evidence of your enoughness. Because when you seek evidence of your enoughness in this example, then the evidence is like this sharp clarity in the mind, which is what a question is, by the way. It's clarifying and putting your mind in a certain place. And then when you ask the right questions, it puts your attention into a certain place, which has both a logical charge, an emotional charge. It has a meaning description, and it'll have a somatic response as well, which means your physical body will change. You might smile, you might relax your shoulders, but there'll be a whole system shift. And I think one of the elegant things we can do with questions is use them as like awakening tools, just like you've described beautifully, and say, yeah, I'm in a grump still, but why might that be? Yeah. Why am I invested in being grumpy still or whatever? And you can use the questioning, not as a cause and effect model, but as an awakening model to go, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I was really hurt by that. Or yeah, I was really, really, really affected by that. And that can open up shift, because anything that's stuck is, well, it's not helpful, right? We want flow in life. So does that resonate with you, that description?
100%. And before I get to that bit there, I love the way that you flip this idea of looking for enoughness, because so often we look at lack, right? And we look at why we're not enough. So I love that. But this idea of asking the questions so that we can have this moment of these light bulb moments, I call it, is perfect. And I love it. And I would assume that in your sessions, that's exactly what you're doing, right? And I would think that you're not going to have a result if somebody comes to you and says, look, I'm really struggling with this. And you just barrage a load of information at them, which is logically sound. And from your experience, it works, but they're not in a place to receive that. I would assume you take them on a journey of questions, right? So you ask them questions and you logically lead their emotional thinking state to a place of logical reason where they can say, oh yeah. And then they own that idea. They own the place that they've arrived in. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here, is that we can't answer questions that people aren't asking. And so we have to first show people in a non-threatening way that there are questions that they should be asking. So create a space in their mind and say, look, there's things that you're not considering here. And once that space is there, help them to inflate in their mind the things that are important from using questions to say, okay, this is actually something I should be considering. I can now look at the world and I can say, I didn't realize that was something I should be considering, but I can now see how important that is. And we help them on that journey through non-threatening questioning.
Yeah, really, really nice, powerful. Yes, I mean, you summarized coaching very well. From what you're saying, you have a very coaching-led approach to your art and to your business, which is wonderful. Because to ask a powerful question can change your life. It's phenomenal. And I'm very interested in the whole human performance system, from breath work to neurology to physicality. But what I've seen over the years is that everything in us human beings starts with our worldview and our perception. And that's the place where we might become an athlete or not, become a business owner, or we stay in a job we don't like. And the action comes from that mind state, which is emotions as well and meaning, but the perceptional value, like how do you see the world, can really only be changed through questions and then direct experience. So the power of a question is really amazing, really amazing. And undoubtedly, from what you're doing, how you describe that, you have an exemplary model to helping people find their purpose, which is wonderful. Brad, to bring this gently to a summary for our listener, what last salient points would you like to share or imbue around, how to think about finding purpose and how to use some of these insights which we both shared in our respective fields? But if they're going about the quest of purpose, what might you share to bring us to a summary here?
It's a good question. And I think for me, it would again come back to that idea of the golden thread. So let's start by trying to uncover that purpose, and say, what is this thing in my life that keeps popping up again and again? Maybe I've not looked for it in the right way, but just try and find that golden thread. Then I would say, let's look at something that I talk about is belief, outlook, action, right? So what we believe determines our outlook, and the way we look at the world determines our actions. And so what paradigms am I maybe, invisible railroads am I running off of that are keeping me going in a certain direction that I'm not aware of? Let me stop for a minute, take a look around at the things I do on a daily basis and say, hold on, is this actually serving me? Does this maybe uncover a little bit of my purpose? Maybe I need to backtrack a little bit. What does that look like? And I think then thirdly, I would say, focus on being a mover, not a taker. So somebody who's actively trying to positively impact the lives of other people, rather than just going at it to get what I can get from it, to get those outward measures of success that we've talked about previously. And I think the very final thing I'd say on that is to also just be aware that none of this stuff that we've talked about ever completely goes away, right? We never get perfect at it because we're humans and we mess stuff up. And we're always learning and we're always developing our understanding, but it can get better and we can get better at managing it. And so, yeah, that would be my summary or takeaway of it.
Beautiful. Literally gold to your golden thread. The gold
Thank
in the
you.
golden thread. Thank you. Wonderful. Brad, thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your process. And in today's world, where there's a lot of noise, we need more signal. And you're right. If you're resonating with the right customers and clients and you're able to get that message super, super clear, then as a business model, it's non-negotiable, right? It needs to be in the system. So we're going to leave show details of how to reach Brad in the show notes, put some links in. Remind me of your business name?
SenseMaker. So we always say the person
There it is, right?
The person that makes the sense has the power. And if you want the power in your life, you've got to be the sense maker in your life and in your business. So SenseMaker.
Fantastic. Yeah, lovely sense maker. It makes so much sense. So that's Brad. Obviously, you can Google that, but we'll put all the links in the show notes. So you got direct links to Brad. You can reach out to myself, of course, if there's always a question that pops up. So, my dear listener, I hope there is something which has sparked your search on purpose, finding an endeavor that's worth going on. So all details will be in the show notes, where to contact us. Go replay this again if you need to. And until the next time, take care.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe. And if a friend would benefit from hearing this, do send it on to them as well. If you would like to get in touch yourself, then you can go to my website, which is saljefferies.com, spelled SALJEFFERIES, saljefferies.com. Hit the Get in Touch link, and there you can send me a direct message. If you'd like to go one step further and learn whether coaching can help you overcome a challenge or a block in your life, then do reach out and I offer a call where we can discuss how this may be able to help you. Until the next time, take care.